Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the Bamboo Lab podcast. As always, I'm your host, Brian Bosley, and for the better part of the past quarter century, I've had the most distinct pleasure and honor of working alongside of some of the biggest performers and survivors, thrivers, and survivors in this world. You ever feel sometimes that you're just a little underachieving in life and you know that you have got so much more to offer? Do you feel like you're that hamster on the wheel and you're spinning, but you're not really going in the direction you'd choose? Well, if so, you've landed in the right spot. This Bamboo Lab podcast was created, written, and broadcast just for you. If you'd like to learn more about what we do here at the Bamboo Lab, feel free to email me at any time. Learn more about our private performance coaching, our corporate speaking, and our group and culture training. Email me. That's Brian with an I at bamboolab3. That's the number 3.com. Brian at bamboolab3.com. I want to read one quick letter out because it's so appropriate for the honored guest we have on today. We're bringing back someone today that was a guest just a couple of weeks ago. And from that episode, he received a text from a listener who said, "Colonel, thank you very much for sharing the Bamboo Lab podcast with me. That was very enjoyable. It flowed very well, and you certainly were entertaining." So before we start, we want to take the time to dedicate this special episode to all of the Marine Corps families, all of you who stay behind and support your loved one as he or she defends our nation and freedom across the world, as you sit and worry and fret. You are a strong tribe, and we honor you today. Let's dissect. All right, we have a guest back today, a guest from episode number 26. And he is retired Marine Corps Colonel John Barnett. John was born in the Metro Detroit area in Michigan, went to Central Michigan University, and had the honor of playing the most glorious sport of rugby. And during his time there, John went to OCS and into the Marine Corps right after college. His primary service was in the intelligence occupation while in the Marines. He was deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan 5 times. He served for 3 years with U.S. Special Operations Command, and in the summer of 2013, he completed a 1-year executive fellowship with the world's largest think tank, the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. He has served 18 months as the Chief of Staff for the 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune. He completed 2 separate assignments at Parris Island, South Carolina, with the most recent assignment being the commander of the Recruit Training Regiment, where he was in charge of training 20,000 new recruits each year. Now he is retired from the service and is honoring us today on this special podcast. I welcome you, my friend and my brother, retired Marine Corps Colonel John Barnett. Welcome, buddy.
Yeah, happy to be talking to you.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so when we broadcast a couple of weeks ago in episode 26, I heard from so many people who just loved what John had to say to the world. And a lot of people are very curious about one special section of the Marine Corps, and that's boot camp. I mean, we've seen movies. We watched, obviously, Clint Eastwood. We've seen all kinds of read books and heard stories of boot camp. And because John was so integral in the Marine Corps boot camp in Parris Island, we brought him back on to ask him a few questions. So I'm going to be learning right along with all of you today. And he served, like I said, as the commanding officer of the 3rd Recruit Training Battalion at Parris Island for 2 years. And they trained a lot of Marines during that time. So, John, I'm going to ask you some questions. Let's just start from the beginning because I'm new at this. This is all brand new to me, and I'm going to be learning a lot with the audience. What is the Marine Corps' approach to recruiting and recruit training? Do they put a lot of effort to it, or is it afterthought or in the margins?
Yeah, so I did a tour on recruiting duty too for 3 years, which was probably the worst tour in my 28 years, even compared to Iraq and Afghanistan. It's just very demanding the way we recruit and the way we work our recruiters. And I'll caveat by saying, while I've got 8 years in recruiting and recruit training, I'm not a recruiter and I was not a drill instructor. I was just in kind of the supervisory roles in those jobs. But so we consider recruiting duty and recruit training, drill instructor duty, special duty assignment. And they get a little bit of extra pay for it, but that doesn't really incentivize it too much. But, we kind of select who we put out on recruiting duty and recruit training. And there's a third duty that's called a special duty assignment as well, which is the Marine security guards that work at our American embassies overseas. And I don't have a lot of experience with that, so I can only speak to really recruiting and recruit training. But, we look for kind of our top performers, our Marines that are going to excel in these duties, because they are just very, very demanding 3-year tours for both the officers and for the enlisted Marines who are doing the lion's share of the work. I recommend to a lot of Marines to seek out a tour on recruiting duty or recruit training, even though I described them as being one of the worst tours and physically, and mentally exhausting. You learn a lot about how the Marine Corps runs and where it all starts, right? How we find people that want to be Marines and then how we turn them into Marines.
So can I ask why it's so physically demanding, John?
Yeah, look at what a recruit goes through for those 13 weeks. It's 12 weeks of training, but they're really at the island for 13 weeks because of an in-processing week. And the drill instructor is doing everything the recruit is doing, and then some. So a recruit has a 16-hour day with, if they're lucky, 8 hours of sleep if they're not standing fire watch or some type of duty at night. The drill instructor is doing that 16 hours day and then doing a couple hours on top of it, getting ready for the next day and doing paperwork and doing logistics and making sure everything's set up for the next training day. So, and they're not just doing it once and then graduating and leaving the island. Okay. They're doing it 7 or 8, 9 times in a 3-year tour. So there is some downtime in between the training cycle. Sometimes it depends on the time of the year. They may train for 13 weeks and then get 3 to 4 weeks off, where they're prepping for the next day, but they're resting, they're taking leave if they want to. There's other times of the year where they're training for 13 weeks with the recruits and graduate and get a week off and then start it right back up again. Is that why they yell so much? Because they're just tired? Well, they do get a little angry. That's put a lot of stress on them. I mean, this is something we talked about a lot when I was down at the regiment. Was what's the balance? There's 3 to 5 drill instructors on a team training 90 up to 95 recruits. Do they all need to be there all the time? Can you manage that as a leader and send a guy home for a day? And we would talk about that. Hey, how tired do I want them? Because you do reach a point of diminishing returns where you're starting to make bad decisions. Your judgment's a little cloudy. And if you can control it and get some rest, then why don't you? We don't always get that opportunity in the Marine Corps to take a knee and get some rest, especially overseas. But in a controlled environment, as a leader, as the senior drill instructor, why don't you, manage your team a little bit better and get them some rest? John, is there a expectancy or what's the longevity of that career as a drill instructor? I mean, is there a certain point of diminishing return? Yeah, so I'll contrast it and say recruiting duty is equally demanding in different ways. You're faced with rejection. You're doing sales, right? And you're getting told no all the time and have people that don't want to talk to you and reject you. And that can wear you out too. But there are recruiters that can become career recruiters. They can change their primary occupation and apply to become a career recruiter. And there's some of them that do 25 years on recruiting duty. Okay. Because they've gotten good at it and they know how to manage their time. You can't do that as a drill instructor. There's no comparison. We don't have a career drill instructor. We have a lot of Marines that come back for a second tour, and we do seek that out because they bring back that experience with them. So they might leave Parris Island or San Diego, and then they'll come back, between 3 and 7 years later for a second tour. So,
okay.
But it's not something you could sustain for 20 years.
Okay.
I don't see how anybody could do it like they do on recruiting duty.
That makes a lot of sense. So I know probably every branch of the service, each branch has very difficult, demanding recruit training. How does the Marine Corps recruit training compare to the other branches of service?
Yeah, ours is, we bump our chest about this sometimes. Ours is longer than all the other services. I don't know if that necessarily is good or bad. It's about 3 to 5 weeks longer than the other services, and they all change from time to time over the years. But that does take a toll again on your body, having a 13-week cycle instead of a 7-week cycle, on both the recruits and the drill instructors. So ours is longer, but I don't know. I don't typically talk bad about the other services because we're all part of the same team. I've witnessed and been exposed to the Coast Guard, the Air Force, and the Army. I have no experience with Navy recruit training, but they all have some really interesting and demanding things that they do during the training cycle. The Coast Guard probably resembles the Marine Corps more than any of the other services, because I think they took a lot of time visiting Parris Island and San Diego and kind of picking up some good ideas, and we've gotten some good ideas from them. The Air Force, I thought was some of it was pretty demanding when I was down there watching it for a week. And so we all do things slightly different because we're all trying to create, a different type of service member.
Okay. So would you recommend recruiting duty or recruit training duty to the Marines? And if so, why?
Yeah, again, it's demanding, but you get a peek behind the curtain. I used to say this because we would get all kinds of congressional delegations and senior leadership visiting Parris Island just to get a peek at what goes on during recruit training. And everybody is an expert every Marine is an expert on recruit training. Why? Because they went to boot camp for 13 weeks. And I say that kind of facetiously, right? But and every officer is an expert on OCS because they went there for 10 weeks. But they're not. It's one thing to go through as a customer, as a recruit. It's another thing to actually see how everything gets done behind the scenes and the amount of work that goes into just running the rifle range or running the swim qualification week. It's not as easy as just showing up and jumping in the pool, which is what you're doing as a recruit, but all the supervision and the training that goes in, as an example, to teach those Marines how to teach swim qualification and do it safely. And so when you experience that as a drill instructor, and you do get a lot of extra training, you may be a marksmanship instructor as well as a drill instructor. You may be a swim qualification Marine. You come out of that tour and you just know a lot more about what it takes to train your Marines in the future, your recruits.
Okay.
And the same thing on recruiting. You learn a lot about why people join the service, and there's a bunch of different reasons for why people join the military. And so it helps you understand later on, after you leave recruiting duty, what motivates Marines to continue to serve. It may change over time. They may have joined for the GI Bill, for financial security, and then they decided they're going to stay in because of the team, the pride of belonging and being part of a team. And so people's motivation changes over time. Sure.
I guess like every area of life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, again, everybody's an expert on it until they go down there and serve in those roles and then realize, wow, there's a lot more that goes into this than what I imagined or what I experienced on the receiving end.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Get the latest insights from top mortgage pros on Mortgage Connects, a podcast by MGIC. We interview thought leaders from across the industry to share their wide-ranging expertise and candid views on critical market developments and current housing trends. Our guests reveal highly effective marketing and referral strategies, training tips and best practices, and what you can expect from the mortgage market in the future. Hear from experts like best-selling author Todd Duncan, U.S. Bank's Lenny McNeil, and Freddie Mac's Danny Gardner. Listen to Mortgage Connects on your favorite app or at mortgageconnects.com today.
With coming in, when a recruit comes into the Marine Corps, they go through recruit training. What is the most difficult adjustment for them?
Yeah, so, some of them can stay in the delayed entry program. They can sign up and wait and not ship to recruit training for up to a year, and maybe even a little bit beyond that with a waiver. But some of them will sign up and ship out a week later. And so, they come in with different levels of preparation. But I think the hardest adjustment is just the sleep cycle, not being able to eat whenever you want, having to go to bed at 8 p.m., wake up at 4 a.m., and just the physical demands in the first two to 3 weeks. Nobody can be completely prepared for that.
And
so
after 2 to 3 weeks,
the toughest thing is having somebody tell you what to do all the time and be stuck in a room with 90 strangers.
I think that would be the most difficult thing for me, is having somebody tell me what to do throughout the day, for sure. Now, so when you said it's the first 2 to 3 weeks, do you just become a little more acclimated at that point after 2 to 3 weeks?
You do. It's body hardening, mental hardening. You just kind of get into a rhythm, hopefully. Most of the recruits that will try to quit will do it in the first 2 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
And then once you make it, there's a couple milestones that are kind of intentional in the training cycle. And really, once you make it through the rifle range, it's extremely rare for somebody to quit. We spend a lot of time trying to talk recruits back into training. The drill instructors actually do a good job with it. They seem demotivating, but the good ones are really not. They're really trying to keep the recruits motivated and keep them moving, even though they're asking a lot of them. But once they get through the rifle range, they're committed at that point.
Okay. What do you see as the hardest part of the daily routine for a recruit? Is it the sleep or?
A lot of it is not knowing what's coming next. They can get on the websites. There's a ton of different websites that are not even sponsored by the Marine Corps that tell you how to make it through recruit training. And so you can see a glimpse of the training schedule and what happens on every day. But it's the uncertainty of, okay, what exactly is swim qualification? How hard is that going to be? What are we actually going to be doing out at the rifle range for those 2 weeks? So it's a lot of it's the uncertainty about what's coming next and how tough it's going to be.
So what is the hardest and most difficult part of the daily life of a drill instructor?
Just keeping up.
Yeah. And having gone through it maybe 5 or 6 times already that year, I'm sure keeping up, your body is hardened and your mind is hardened. But
yeah, and the drill instructors all have different roles. They all should be capable of filling any role on the team. But you progress to the senior drill instructor, and it's different. So you might have done 5 cycles, and all of a sudden you're the senior drill instructor. You're like, wow. Even though I watched my boss the previous 4 or 5 cycles, this is a lot different than I thought it was going to be now that I'm in that role.
Okay. Now, from what I remember, you had a unique experience on Parris Island with you had the only all-female unit in the Marine Corps 4th Battalion, where all the females enlisted in the Marines went for training. What was unique about that? Were there any specific challenges? Tell us a little bit about that, if you could.
Yeah, well, it's funny because, I witnessed it at 3rd Battalion, which was one of the all-male battalions in the early 2010 to 2012, and I went back as the regimental commander. And even when I was there in 2010 to 12, I thought that 4th Battalion did training a little bit different. And here I am, a wizened old lieutenant colonel at the time. But I thought they did it a little bit different. And I wish I had done this earlier, but my last 3 or 4 months there, I was friends with the 4th Battalion commander. She took me on a tour, and I realized, okay, they're not doing anything that really different than we are. But there's that perception that I think has just been in the Marine Corps for as long as 4th Battalion has been around, because they did used to do training different. They had a different training cycle, but that changed 40 years ago. They were doing the same training as the men, but I would have, as recently as 5 years ago, I'd have female Marines being on the week of graduation. We would do a breakfast with a kind of a random sampling of the new Marines. And they would ask, "Sir, did I get the same training as the males?" And here they are, right? They've been through 12 and a half weeks of training, and they're about to leave and continue on in the Marine Corps and go to follow-on training, and they still don't think they're trained the same way because they're isolated.
Okay.
Geographically, too, a little bit on the Parris Island. So they don't get to witness, at least years ago, they didn't get to witness each other's training. And the male Marines were the same way. Oh, they don't train as hard as us, right? There was that perception.
Sure.
And so we came up with an idea, and had to get briefed at pretty high levels, but we put a female platoon in a male company. So it was still an all-female squad bay, right? We're not going to have males and females, 19-year-olds living together in an open air squad bay with a community restroom and all that.
Yeah.
But we did put them in the same barracks, essentially, in their own squad bay, and then it just kept going. I've been out now for 3 years, but we tried it a couple times, and there was a lot of logistics issues with it at first. But I think they're at the point now where that's kind of the standard at Parris Island, and they've even started that in San Diego. And I think in the long term, it was almost like the females were segregated. Okay. And I know the Marine Corps probably doesn't like this term, but now they're more integrated at training.
Uh-huh.
And so, it might take 10 years culturally in the Marine Corps to say, hey, we actually really do the same exact training now because we're doing it together every training cycle.
Now, are other branches of service, do they offer the same type of training for their enlisted female?
Yeah, and I think they do it at a different level than the Marine Corps, and I won't speak too much on it because I'm not an expert, but yeah, they do it. They integrate slightly differently.
Okay. Do you have any idea? So you said the female training is very similar to the male training, and that happened roughly 40 years ago. Any idea what the impetus to that change was 40 years ago?
No, I couldn't. I can't speak in detail on that, and I threw out 40 years ago, but
it might have been okay.
It might have been like mid 80s, late 80s.
Okay. Gosh, I hope the mid 80s.
I don't think there was ever an intention to keep it separate.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you. Oh, go ahead.
No, I was just say it was the only all-female unit in the Marine Corps.
Okay, all right.
The 4th Battalion, and now it's not anymore. And I'll tell you, the female drill instructors, God love them, I thought they were just as good as the male drill instructors. They resisted it for a while because there was that history of the uniqueness of 4th Battalion being that only unit in the Marine Corps. So there's always institutional resistance whenever you try to change anything, especially in a service that values its history so much like the Marine Corps.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, we talk about that here in the podcast a while back, and just the cycles of change. The first time an idea is introduced, it's usually ridiculed or denied. Then it's opposed, and finally, if it pushed through effectively, it becomes accepted as self-evident. It sounds like that's what's happening with the Marine Corps for the female recruit training. Can you tell the audience a little bit about what an end of cycle debrief is, and what's the purpose?
Yeah, it's just something, and I didn't make this up. This has been going on at Parris Island, and I'm sure at San Diego for years. At the end of every training cycle, that 13-week cycle that the drill instructors go through, we would sit down collectively as a group, and everybody got input. Tell us what worked, tell us what didn't work, what should we change, and why. Right. And we would always ask about the purpose of things.
Okay.
Why are we doing something this way? And if we couldn't answer it, especially like nobody in the room knew, other than that's the way we've always done it, then we would delve into it a little bit deeper and say, okay, why are we doing this? Other than we've been doing it for 30 years this way. Well, what's the purpose of this? So it was interesting to hear a lot of the input. And again, I didn't care if you had been there for 3 months or 3 years. Everybody got to provide input.
So with the input, were the recruits providing input or?
No, the drill instructors.
Okay.
The training cadre.
Okay. All right. And how many drill instructors are there for, like, what's the makeup of that? How many drill instructors are for each group coming in?
So typically, I mean, it's changed and varied over the years, especially when the service grew in the early 2000s, when the size of the Marine Corps, the end strength grew. But typically, it's 6 platoons in a training cycle.
Mm-hmm.
It could be up to 8 sometimes, and there's 3 to 5 drill instructors in each platoon, and a handful of officers supervising.
Okay. Now, I'm assuming you've seen the movie Heartbreak Rage with Clint Eastwood.
Mm-hmm.
How realistic is that?
Well, that was about 2nd Recon Battalion. So you're talking about Full Metal Jacket.
No, I'm thinking about Heartbreak Ridge, where they got in there and everybody, there was no one leading the squad, and they were just playing music and shooting pool. And
yeah, that does happen sometimes in the Marine Corps. We try not to make that happen too much, but yeah, I mean, there's plenty. There are as many infantry platoons as there are in the Marine Corps, and my son is an infantry platoon commander in the Marine Corps right now out in California. I mean, he took over a platoon recently that had nobody in charge of it. So he was the first, it had been gapped for a period of time. And, this is what's good about the Marine Corps. And this is how we train people. Hey, the next man or woman, step up and take charge.
Wow.
So
I bet he's faced some good learning and challenges in that process.
he is. He's going through that, that first 2 years in the Marine Corps of trying to figure out everything he likes about it and everything he doesn't. And what can he change?
What can he change? Do you think do you have any idea if he's going to be going a career, or is he making decisions yet?
I have an opinion on what he should do.
Yeah.
You know how your kids are. They don't listen to you. I think every Marine goes through that, and every service member. Hey, do I want to stay in, or do I want to get out? And we don't need you all to stay in. It's a youth-based organization.
Right.
We need about 18 to 20% of you to stay in and become part of the career force, and the rest of you we need to turn over.
Okay.
And replace you with somebody younger.
So if I have a new recruit or a prospective Marine or a future Marine, somebody who's thinking about going to the Marine Corps, any advice for them?
Just be physically and mentally prepared. I mean, there's always, I call it the shock of capture. No matter how prepared you are for it on the first couple days, it's going to be shocking to the system. Just listen to what your drill instructors tell you and trust them.
You said
help your teammates out, your fellow Marines or your fellow recruits.
The shock of capture.
Shock of capture.
Tell me about that a little bit.
Well, we use that term in combat. That especially my background in intel, when you capture an enemy combatant, you can usually question them and get information out of them right away. If it's going to work at all, it's usually pretty quickly, and it's the shock of capture. It's disorienting when you're captured by an enemy force, right? So there's a little bit of that feeling as a recruit when the drill instructors walk out into the squad bay for the first time and start yelling at you and telling you what to do, and you don't understand half of what they're saying. And so that's not an official term. I use that term, shock of capture.
Oh, I like that.
But it's intentional at Parris Island a little bit.
Yeah.
Obviously, we're not treating them like an enemy combatant, but we are trying to make things slightly disorienting.
Sure. I'm going to have to try that in my personal life. Sometimes I feel like I'm always in the shock of capture. Well, your time on Parris Island, obviously, I can only imagine, and I've heard a few of them, more, kind of the benign, general ones. You must have a lot of stories. What would you say?
I need to write some of these down.
I think you should too, because I know you're getting older, so your mind is starting to. What's the most interesting story from your time at Parris Island?
Ooh, the one I've told a couple of people, plenty of times before, is it was from around. It was almost. It was like 2 days before Thanksgiving in 2011, and I'll just call him Recruit Smith. But this is when I was at 3rd Battalion. So we had a recruit, and I know all this story now afterwards because I sat down and talked to him before we discharged him. He did not finish recruit training. But what had happened is he was supposed to ship to Parris Island. I think he was from Tennessee. He was supposed to ship in January of 2012, but somebody fell out and couldn't make it or had gotten injured waiting to go to training. So his recruiter asked him to move up, and he gave him about 3 days notice. Hey, can you move from January to the week before Thanksgiving? And he did. And he agreed to do it. And then he showed up, and he and you can do this in the first couple. I shouldn't tell this story in too great a detail. But the first 3 days there, the recruits don't know what's going on. So he walked up to a recruit that was standing fire watch, like the duty while everybody's sleeping, and at 2 a.m, and he said, I need to go outside and meet the drill instructor. Well, that was a fabricated story, but the other recruit just let him go. And he had his uniform on and a little backpack, and he took off, and he was trying to escape Parris Island. And when I sat him down and when I debriefed him after we found him, which took a while, he had traveled about 9 miles in the dark on Parris Island. It was raining. It was still, again, the week before Thanksgiving, so it was cold for Parris Island at least, and raining, because I remember that morning. And he didn't know where he was going, but he traveled about 9 miles on foot, and then he ended up at base housing. This is the best part of the story. And my son had, was just barely a teenager at the time, and his mountain bike the chain had been falling off of it. So I had leaned it up against the garage to remind me to fix it one day when I came home from work. Well, that recruit found that mountain bike at my house on base, jumped on it at probably 5 a.m, and found out, like my son, that the chain doesn't work. So he made it like 2 blocks away, and he dumped it in somebody else's front lawn and then stole their bike that was sitting outside. It was a girl's bike with a basket on the front of it. And so he put his little moonbeam, his flashlight, on the front basket and started driving towards where he thought the gate was. And he made it to the front gate. But by then, the drill instructors had woken up all the recruits and done a count real quick, like they do every morning, and realized they were missing one. So they had alerted the MPs at the front gate, who saw this recruit driving up on a girl's bike with a basket and his flashlight on it, and they stopped him and brought him back to us. And so what I asked him, when I had him get cleaned up, and that afternoon brought him over to the office, and the sergeant major and I sat there and talked to him, just trying to figure out what was going on. And he told me about moving up to ship early, and this kid would have made it. He would have been a good Marine. He was married. He was a 22-year-old, recruit. He was married. And when he was asked to move up and ship early, he didn't have the time. He was supposed to move his wife into a better neighborhood, into a better apartment. And he didn't have time to do any of that, and he was worried about her.
Oh, man. But he tried
once he got to Parris Island, he couldn't get it out of his head. He's like, I'm too worried about her. I just need to get out of here and get back home and take care of her.
Well, so John, and he escaped.
So I asked him if he wanted to stay at that point. He didn't.
He didn't.
Because I would have kept him. And I just could tell it wasn't going to work mentally for him.
Right.
If we had let him ship in January, maybe everything would have worked out. He would have had his wife situated by then. But just didn't work out. Hopefully he's doing well, whatever he's doing. He definitely had some heart.
Well, yeah, he has the heart and courage to jump on a girl's bike with a basket and tie a flashlight to escape Parris Island from the Marine Corps. I think that's you got spunk. Oh, that's awesome. Well, maybe he was facing a little bit of the shock of capture.
Yeah, it was a shock of capture, and it was, again, I think he was just worried about her.
I love that phrase. Yeah. Well, yeah, I hope he and his family are doing well, and he's recovered from his decision there, and is taking that spunk and that spirit to another level in life. Is there any final thing you want to share, John? Anything at all before we wrap up today?
No, I mean, again, if there's any Marines or future Marines out there listening, and you get a chance, you decide to stay in the Marine Corps, I recommend trying recruiting or recruit training. Perfect. Duty. I mean, it's not the best duties in the Marine Corps. There's other really good ones, but you'll learn a lot.
Okay, so if you want to peek behind the curtain, that's the place to peek.
That's it.
Oh, that's great. I got a question for you, John, and for the Bamboo Pack and the listeners out there. Many of you don't know, but I've known John now for 30 years, and I had the pleasure of being his roommate in college, playing rugby with him, and being the best man when he married his lovely wife, Gretchen. And I'm going to ask you a question, John. Did you think back in those days when we were? I found a picture last night of you and I after a game. We were full of mud, and I think we had a beer in our hands. We probably did. And did you ever think that those two young knuckleheads 30 years later would be sitting here doing a podcast together talking about your journey in the Marine Corps through the Bamboo Lab podcast?
I did not know.
I didn't.
I had planned on doing 4 years in the Marine Corps and getting out and going on to use the GI Bill and do something else. Obviously, I didn't do that. So, but it worked out. Yeah,
it certainly did. And we're appreciative of that too. So, and I'm very appreciative of you coming on here today, John. I just want to capture 3 things that I really like that John said. I wrote a bunch of things, and I think these apply no matter what your profession, vocation, passion, or calling is in life. And, when there's change, as John said, institutional change always meets resistance. I think we as individuals have to realize every time we go through a change in our lives, whether it's professional or personal, where it's forced upon us or it's our own choice, we're going to meet resistance. And the resistance is primarily going to be within our own heads and hearts. And so quite often we have to stop what we're doing and say, why are we doing the things this way? In life, if you're struggling at all or things just aren't clicking the way you'd like them, just stop and ask, why are we doing things this way? And if the answer is the way I've always done it, that's probably not the way to do it. And the last thing that I think is going to be the title of today's podcast that John said, it was very, very simple but very prophetic, is be physically and mentally prepared. That goes whether you're a recruit going to the Marine Corps or any branch of service, or you're just going through the day-to-day existence of life and living and loving and trying to control, build your own internal empire. Always come in each day physically and mentally prepared. John, thanks, my friend, for being back on here for this episode. We're going to broadcast this as a special episode. So I really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule and talking to me, talking to the listeners and the followers of the Bamboo Lab podcast. Thanks, brother.
All right. Thank you.
All right, everyone out there, we're going to wrap up today. Please, by all means, get out there and sculpt your life. Sculpt it boldly. Give your best every day. Show love and respect to others and live consciously. God bless you. God bless your family. God bless your friends. And by all means, God bless your beautiful dreams.